Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us today. My welcome to Remembering the Phoenix Indian School with Patty and Rosalie Talahongva. My name is Jake Friedman, and I am the Senior Coordinator at the Virginia G. Piper Center for Creative Writing at Arizona State University. This program is part of the NEA Big Read. NEA Big Read is a program of the National Endowment for the Arts in partnership with Arts Midwest. The opening song you heard was Wabash Blues by trombone player Russell Moore, who actually went to PI. Opening photographs were of a recent tour to the Phoenix Indian School Visitor Center. Those were taken by Ryan Krebs. And then the historical photographs were provided by Robert Trenner, Derek Horn, the Library of Congress, the Heard Museum, and the Arizona State Library through some Google searching. Before going any further, I'd like to begin with a brief land acknowledgement from the Piper Center. And so this refers to our specific house in Arizona State University specifically. Obviously, we're going to be getting into the history of the Phoenix Indian School shortly, but the Piper Writers House in Arizona State University's 4 campuses are situated on the unceded ancestral lands of the Acamel Alham, Pima, Pipash, Maricopa, and many other indigenous peoples. We recognize the original stewards of this land and honor those living here today, including the Gila River Indian Community, the Salt River Pima Maricopa Indian Community, the Pascua Yaqui Tribe, and the Fort McDowell Yavapai Nation. Indigenous lives, knowledge, and stories have been rooted here long before the university came to be. They remain central to the past, present, and future of this land and to the Piper Center's current mission and literary communities. Wherever you might be, we invite you to join us in acknowledging this land and history and in understanding that acknowledgement is simply not enough. We hope you will learn about the Indigenous peoples who came before you, if you are not Indigenous yourself, about present day American Indian lives and lands, and about what you can do to support Indigenous goals, rights, and culture in and around your own communities. On that note, if you are joining us for the webinar or you're live on Facebook, it would be great if you could post where you're coming from in the chat, sort of show us a little bit of love where you're coming from. If you are a PI Brave yourself, put your dorm, put the year that you graduated. Really, I know that we already had a little bit of from Peggy taught at the Phoenix Indian School as well. So just in terms of a really quick overview of our program today, we're going to actually open with a virtual tour of the Phoenix Indian School, which I think is going to be really awesome. We have a cell phone, it has good service and connectivity, so that should go really well. It's going to cover some of the grounds and just going to try to give you a little bit of the sense of space as you might experience if you are here in Phoenix and have been to the park and have been to the center, but to kind of try to provide a little bit of that history, right? Bring that space alive. After that, we're going to segue into our panel for today. So we're going to spend maybe 15 or 30 minutes in moderated conversation, really just trying to set the stage for audience Q&A, which we really would like to be the focus of this event. So while you're welcome to use the chat to share thoughts, to engage, to comment, we would really love to see that. We know that technology needs all the love that we can give it. Please post your questions in the Q&A and we will do our best to answer all of them in our event today. We'll also be providing some more information at the end about making a tour at the Phoenix Indian School Visitor Center or even just visiting the grounds. So when we do Q&A, I'll kind of speak a little bit more to our process there as well. So it is my great pleasure then to read the biographies of Rosalie and Patty Talahongva before we transition into it. Rosalie Talahongva is a member of the Hopi Tribe and the curator at the Phoenix Indian School Visitor Center Gallery. As a former student of the Phoenix Indian High School, she shares her boarding school experience with visitors to the PISVC, which is the acronym. In addition to the gallery, the PISVC has rental space and a commercial kitchen. It is all very beautiful. It has a stand mixer. It's new, which she also oversees. She enjoys outdoor activities and likes to hike in the Grand Canyon. Patty Talahongva is the former curator of the Phoenix Indian School Visitor Center. Ironically, when she interviewed for the position in 2012, the hiring committee had no idea she actually attended the Phoenix Indian School. Obviously, she got the job. Also, ironically, she landed her first job as a journalist while attending PI, and that started her career. She left her position as curator of the Phoenix Indian School Visitor Center in 2019 and joined Indian Country Today as the executive producer, tasked with launching a once-a-week national newscast. Then the pandemic hit, and she helped Indian Country Today launch a weekday newscast and became the anchor of the newscast. In August, they started renting the boardroom at PISVC and created a studio there. Phoenix Indian continues to be a major force in her life and career. We're really, really excited for this conversation presentation today, especially with such a strong and important part of Phoenix history in the context of celebrating Indigenous literary arts and culture throughout the Valley. So what we're going to do now is turn it over to Patty, and Patty is going to take us on a quick tour of PI and kind of show us some of those buildings. So this is working great. So Patty, take it away.
Eskuli Jacob, Eskol umaangkak ya, ne kutsaku yang mana yan Hopi matsiwa, ne Patty Talahongva yan pahan matsiwa. Welcome everyone. I'm so happy that people are able to join us, and I'm reading the comments, and you're joining us all the way from Scottsdale and right down the road here in Phoenix to, I think I saw somebody in Vancouver log in. And then another woman said she was a teacher here, and oh my gosh, we'd love to talk to you about your experience as well. So I'm here outside in, it's now Steele Indian School Park, but I like to tell people that when we come here, we don't see a park and we don't even see a school, you know, we see a home because this is where we live. This was our neighborhood. And the building you're looking at right now is the dining hall. And this actually is older than the state of Arizona. So it was completed, it took 2 years to build, and it was completed in 1902. And beautiful architecture here. One thing that we have documentation of is that the boys at Phoenix Indian helped build this dining hall. And it was first meant to be like an auditorium, but they quickly realized with their large number of students here that they needed a big place to feed everyone. So they actually did an addition in the back and created the kitchen. But the boys helped build this because, again, as we get into the history of the boarding schools, they were not true higher education institutions. They were meant to teach the kids skills that would help build the towns and cities, not their reservation homelands, but towns and cities. So carpentry, bricklaying, things like that were taught. And so this was basically on the job training for the boys to show the skills that they had learned at school. So again, this is the dining hall. And, you know, for any family that comes together, when you eat together, breakfast, lunch, and dinner, you know, weekdays and weekends, you form that family, you know, as big as it was throughout the years, you form that family. So your classmates become your brothers and sisters, basically. I mean, it was very much the place where everybody gathered, you know, 3 times a day to share their meals. And so we can tell you all kinds of great stories about the dining hall. We'll talk about details as we go along and explain that. This is the sidewalk here that you see used to be actually a big road. And at the end of the sidewalk, you turn back that way and you went out to Indian School Road. So those high-rise buildings are actually on Central Avenue. And then Indian School Road runs east and west. And here's the campus. And there were dorms back over here. And then our rec center was over there. And understand that the campus changed through the decades, depending on when you came to school here. So some of the dorms changed, and definitely at the start of the school is a very different looking kind of campus because the buildings were constructed out of wood. And then in later years, they became brick buildings. This area here, this faces Indian School Road, and this used to be the complex for all the classrooms and the administration. And again, if you take a look down here, this huge building or the huge sidewalk is actually much smaller than the road that used to be here. And there was enough space on either side to park your cars. And this whole area here, when the school year started, it was back-to-back Greyhound and Trailways buses, bringing the students in from all the different reservations. And then you'd get here and people would be watching for the Hopi bus or another tribal bus to come in. And the kids would get out, their foot lockers were deposited on the sidewalk in the grass over here. And then you had to go into Memorial Hall, and that's what we're walking towards. This is actually the Phoenix Indian School Visitor Center. And that building was constructed in the early 30s, and it first served as the elementary school, and it replaced the old elementary school that had been built out of wood. So again, the boys helped build all 3 of these buildings here. The Memorial Hall here was built in 1922, and it was meant to honor the boys who served in World War I. And at that point in time, Native Americans were not full citizens. We did not have US citizenship. Some states granted tribes in their state citizenship, but we didn't have a federal law, making us all citizens of the US, which is crazy when you think about that. So here's Memorial Hall, gorgeous. If we could take you inside, you would just be amazed at how beautiful the inside is. When the city of Phoenix acquired the land after the school closed in 1990, they turned this into, they renovated it and turned it into space that people, organizations can rent. And they restored the actual wood floor and also the seats in there. So it's gorgeous. The white pillar that you see in front here is it has the names in bronze here of all the boys who served in World War I. And there were 2 who actually died in World War I. And again, you look at the inscription here, it says, in memory of the students of this school who enlisted in the Army and Navy during the World War. And you realize, people never thought there would be another World War. So this is Memorial Hall. And this is looking east now. And our old gym used to be back here. And then the football field was way in the very back. Looking east here, the actual grounds of the Indian School went from Central Avenue all the way east to 16th Street. And today, 16th Street and Indian School is where the Phoenix Indian Medical Center is now located, because they were able to get former land from the boarding school here. Again, it was all government land. And the white building that you see there is the Phoenix Veterans Hospital. And when the VA wanted land to build a VA hospital, they went to Interior and got that bit of land, which is on 7th Street and Indian School Road. And then there's a parking structure right here. And that was the site of my old dorm. And then right behind it was Rosalie's dorm. And then the street here is 3rd Street that comes into the park today. So that's our brief little tour of this part of Still Indian School. And again, keep in mind that to the north of us, behind these buildings here, there's a lot more land. And that's where we had our football fields, our track fields, and baseball fields. And then all the trades like printing and auto mechanics, things like that, were all located along Central Avenue on the property here. So, and again, keep in mind, this sidewalk was once an actual road with parking on either side. And I'm going to leave you with a shot of the Phoenix Indian School Visitor Center, and I'll join you back inside. And I'm happy, I really want this to be a conversation where people ask questions and we can answer them the best that we can. So if people have a question for me, I'm happy to answer that. And I want, so hopefully you guys can learn. And by the way, a lot of the people out here that you see today are Pokemon hunting.
Cool. Thank you so much, Patty. Yeah, we'll see you inside shortly. So we're just going to have a brief sort of set transition here while we move into the Q&A. And I think, Rosalie, maybe if you don't mind maybe starting us off while Patty's kind of making her way in, and, kind of thinking too about really trying to have this be a conversation, right? I was wondering if maybe for me, a lot of my questions are really just meant to set us up. So like, could you maybe just speak to kind of the early history of the Phoenix Indian School? I know that there's sort of, founded in 1891, right? And then there's sort of a kind of a modern sort of era as well. But if you don't mind maybe just speaking to that early history, right? When was it established? What was it established for? What was the culture at the time?
Rosalie Talahongva. Thank you all for joining us here. My Hopi name is Nuiswa. My English name is Rosalie, and I really appreciate the time here. So, Jake, when you're talking about early on, the school was actually built in 1891, and that's when the students start coming here. So early on, there were only a couple of tribes. It was really small. But at the same time, the federal government had started to take the children from the reservations and indoctrinate them into the whole Western civilization. So the idea of kill the Indian, save the man was really the mantra of the boarding schools, the federal boarding schools. And the boarding schools were the brainchild of Lieutenant Richard Henry Pratt. And he was an Army officer, so all the ideas that the military has were actually brought to the boarding schools themselves. So Patty was talking about details, we talked about demerits, we talked about inspections here, because really those are everyday life for students coming to boarding schools, federal boarding schools. Fred Caboti, who is Hopi, I think says it best. He says, when you first start attending school, they gave you a name, they assign you an age, a birth date, and his name turned out to be Fred. But what is Fred in the grand scheme of things? As Native people, our names have a reason and have a history behind them, and they actually show where you belong within your family system, within your clan system. So to suddenly become Fred, you lose that identity. There was the idea of cutting your hair so that you could become civilized. And boys, they can't have long hair. The girls were in bobs, and yet some of the tribes, the only time you're cutting your hair is when you're in mourning. Someone has died in your family, and as a little child coming to boarding school and having your hair cut and looking around and all your classmates have their hair cut, and you're wondering who died and what happened, that everybody has someone who died, and you're away from your family. You've been taken away from your family. You're living down here among strangers, so to speak, and you're being fed foreign foods. We didn't have milk, we didn't have beef, we didn't have those kinds of foods. And so milk, a lot of Native Americans are lactose intolerant. So imagine drinking milk every day and having your stomach gurgle, and you're still wondering who died, and you're still having to remember that your name is now Jane, and you're just trying to get through every single day. It was a real difficult time, in the early periods of the school, throughout the decades. And then as time went on, after World War I, and the contributions made by Native American people, with the code talkers, the Choctaw code talkers being the first code talkers in a war, that acknowledgement, maybe it's not a bad thing to have these foreign languages. And then after World War II, there were over 30 tribes that had code talkers. The most famous of those are from the Navajo Nation. But at that time, it's like, well, maybe it's not a bad thing. And then you get into the 60s, where you had the whole hippie movement, and leather and turquoise, and being an Indian is cool, and things like that. So then those ideas started to be loosened. And then keep in mind that the children themselves were doing things. Instead of completely stopping the idea of speaking your language, they just spoke to their own kinsmen. And so the languages were able to survive that whole idea of, kill the Indian, save the man. So the children of the boarding schools, the children of this school, actually changed that narrative, changed the idea of the boarding school. And so by the time that Patty and I came here, it was okay to be an Indian. It was okay to speak your language. And Patty talked about the buses that came and lined up, and all the different tribes, they're getting off these buses. Now everybody's speaking their own language. It was an incredible time to be here. And at that time we had all different clubs, the Apache Club, the Powwow Club, the Hopi Club, the Papago Club. They're now known as the Thanaapam tribe, but back then they were still known as Papago tribe. So all those tribes are represented, and they were all speaking their own languages. They had their own dress. traditional attire. Can you imagine in your Foot Locker? I better pack my eagle feathers. I might be dancing. I better pack my bells, my moccasins. All those things are packed and brought to the boarding school. So imagine all the regalia that was here at any given time. And, to be proud to be a Native person, it was a really incredible time to be here. And, then when it closed, they were still having that, having those opportunities. When the school closed in 1990, there were less than 100 students here. So in that class, you didn't have as many clubs because you didn't have as many people to participate, but it was a real incredible turnaround from early on, and the taking of the children from their families and not being able to see their families for years on end, 10, 12 years at a time, and hoping that Native people would not go back to the reservations, would not go back to their families and become civilized United States citizens. And with that, let me invite Patty back in, and she's back from being outside, and I think she's cooled off a little bit. So Patty, please join us, and forgive us. We're in social distancing right now, so even though we're sisters, we're in different households, and we have to make sure that we're keeping everyone safe. So she's a little bit away from me today.
Cool. Yeah, I love it too, because obviously with the journalism background, I do feel so like anchor-like. It's like we had a live tour, right? So now we've got the panel, and I really like I just love kind of the way that you articulated the change of the Phoenix Indian School as well, because I feel like for non-Native folks, or I mean maybe even Native folks who don't have that experience directly, right? Because I mean, it's not just one community. It's like there's so many tribes, there's so many people moving here, right? When we hear Phoenix Indian School or we think of the park, I feel like we might forget about the fact that this originated after the American Indian Wars, right? Like literally because it was cheaper to educate individuals than like, wage a war, and that militarization continued, through, and that it was only the war effort that even began to create some space, but that this was also these were changes, if I understand you correctly, right, that were driven by the students, right? This was not the school sort of opening up space for more cultural expression or for more strength, resiliency, integrity. It's like the preservation of the languages, the preservation of this history has been from the students themselves, from the children, right?
I would say so, because one of the things, in the very beginning in the 1800s, when the schools were not just Phoenix Indian, but all of these schools, Carlisle Indian School in Pennsylvania, and other schools were established, they prohibited the kids from speaking their languages, but yet they didn't stop. They, even though they were punished, some of them were not just orally reprimanded, but physically reprimanded for speaking their languages. And yet they took that underground and they continued to speak. So then when World War II comes around, what happens? The same government that said, you can't speak your languages, turned around and asked the tribes to create codes in their languages to pass military messages. And they were able to do that because they kept their language alive. And so I heard my sister talking earlier, by the time we got to school here, everyone was speaking their languages, and it was just amazing. And I also want to point out that how you're talking about encouraging people to learn about Native Americans in whatever land where they live, because all of this is Indian country, not was, is Indian country. And you should know, who were the people who originally were the caretakers of that land, whether you live in Phoenix or whether you live in Chicago or whatever area that you live in. And this idea of connection and understanding and knowledge, I think, is important, even for us as our Indian people, because when we came to school here, all of a sudden we met people from tribes we never knew existed. And I remember meeting some Quechan students, and I was like, wow, Quechan, where's that? Who are you people? Because it sounded so exotic to me. And then I found out they're from Yuma, basically the Yuma, Arizona area, not from, that's where their traditional homelands are. But it makes me laugh now because we were like, wow, that's so cool. And I know my sister met John Bullshows. He attended school here, and he and his brother are Crow from Montana. And they had a couple of family situations happen where they were orphaned, and his aunt lived here in Phoenix, or their aunt did. So she said, come to Phoenix Indian and I can watch over you, and you can go to school here at boarding school. And so John and his brother came down, Sam, and they were both really tall pro-Indian guys coming down here to all the short Indians, basically. Right. And nobody had ever met a Crow Indian before. And so hearing them speak their language, everyone thought they were so exotic. So, we need to learn about each other too as tribal people. That's my point.
Yeah. And I mean, I think it's sort of, efforts like those that take place within the Phoenix Indian School Visitor Center that are so crucial to preserving that history in some ways, right? Which I think is sort of so central to, again, the center, but then also some of the other work that is being highlighted through the NEA Big Read, like Labriola Center and the community archiving, or, all over the place. There are a number of questions that are starting to come in through the Q&A. So if there was anything else that either of you maybe wanted to speak to before kind of just working through some of the things that people are interested in.
I would like to point out, we don't have any yearbooks, but there are some around us. So our mascot was the Braves, and the girls' teams were called the Bravettes. Our yearbook and our student newspaper was called the Redskin. Now, that didn't come really from the students, and the administration had a contest to change the name, because before that it was just called the Phoenix Indian. And so in that whole process, somebody said, Redskin. So I know when people come into the visitor center here and they see the yearbooks, they get really offended. But it was a different time, and it wasn't our mascot. It was just the name of our yearbook and our newspaper.
And overall, if you look at different schools, Indian schools, or if you look at schools on the reservations, they're always like the Braves, the Warriors, the Scouts, something like that. And the Redskins is another one that is used, for names for those schools or for the mascots and such. And so that really didn't come from the people, from the tribes, the students. This is what you are, so this is what you'll be as far as your mascot goes. So,
and I think the other big thing to remember is that when they were called the Redskins, and I don't like that name myself personally, but they didn't do the fake war paint. I mean, we don't dress up and play Indian. We are Indian, so we don't need all that. I got called the accoutrements, so whatever. So anyway, we'll get beyond that. What are some questions?
Yeah, totally. Well, and I think it's sort of, again, there's a different, hopefully, the Redskins football team will also wind up in a museum someday, right? And those.
Well, they're on their way, because they're just called the Washington team now.
Yeah. So, so I mean, I think there are, there's a lot that sort of people are interested in. And so I think, maybe a good place to start, Michelle had a question, and I feel like there was maybe one in the chat too, but Michelle's kind of bringing in a perspective from Australia, where Aboriginal children are taught about the stolen generations of children who were taken from the families as part of a system of forced assimilation. There's an initiative of reconciliation, a National Sorry Day each year to recognize the experience of First Nations. I know that in Canada recently, there was a very large scale MMIW effort as well, right? There isn't such an acknowledgement in the United States, and the MMIW effort that, we're also sort of touching on is in its sort of infancy or nascency here, at least in a legal sense, right? What approach do you think could be taken in the United States, or sort of more broadly, where do you see the education of this history happening or not, and how could we address it?
Well, I think in Australia, there was a movie called The Rabbit Proof Fence, and there was actually a book that the movie was based on. And it was really horrible in their situation, because not only were the Aboriginal kids discriminated against and forced to go to boarding school, but only the ones who were lighter skinned, because they were the ones who were thought to be more intelligent. And so those kids were taken away. How did they become biracial? Well, with the railroad coming in, they were all the men from Europe who went to Australia and then had children with Aboriginal women. And it's those kids who were targeted. So it's a really sad story. I think that books and movies like that are helpful, because it really shocks people. But to try to get a mandate. I mean, some states have some kind of mandate where you have to teach Native American history, but only from tribes in your area. It's up to each person individually to go out and get that knowledge, because we're here to tell you we're still surviving, you know, and there's all these government boarding schools. There are museum exhibits like the one at the Heard Museum to teach, but you've got to be aware of your own country's background. You know, when Native Americans say you're on stolen ground, you know, why are they saying that? Well, go back and look at your history and really get that understanding.
Yeah, I think that's a great answer too, right? And I think like this kind of maybe feeds into the next question as well. And definitely like feel free to kind of go back and forth or move around, right? But it seems like the Tawana had a comment too, right? And it's sort of Tawana's question is, you know, she's grateful to, or they are grateful to have visited the Heard Museum and Learning, right? And so we're lucky to have institutions like Phoenix Indian School Visitor Center, like the Heard, that try to make it easier for people to learn. But then there's this question about school systems leaving out the true story of Native history and colonization, right? Which to me seems to be sort of, you know, a very transparent attempt to continue to justify the land seizure and to manifest destiny, right? Like it seems like there's sort of a continuum in the space there, right? Between sort of the erasure of Native history within the United States curriculum and then, you know, the failure to institute these things locally and on the state level, right?
Do you want to talk about this Arizona
Sure.
education?
And that's a good point, and that's something that we're trying to change here at the Phoenix Indian School Visitor Center, with that education of teachers and being more comfortable telling the story of Native American people and our history. And so here at the Phoenix Indian School Visitor Center, we actually partner with the Heard Museum and the Arizona Department of Education and the City of Phoenix, and we hold events here at the Teachers Institute and Teach the Teachers, which is actually continuing education for Arizona teachers that speaks specifically to Native American history and the history of the boarding school, obviously here, you know, in Phoenix. And so that's just one step, one little thing that we can do to start that education and start those conversations about, hey, why didn't I know this? Or how come I don't know this? It's just really incredible that whole history is just erased. And, you know, if you look at it, if there was a war and the Native Americans won, then it was a massacre. But if, you know, the settlers won, then it was a victory. It was a war. It was triumph. You know, that kind of thing. So being the minority and not having a large population, sometimes our voices are lost. But, you know, if we can share and people are open to learning, then our history can be told, and you know, everyone benefits from that, from learning that.
And I remember the first time we had one of the teacher institutes here. It's open for any educator, K through 12th grade, and it was held in the event room here. And I remember the teachers. I walked through at one point, you know, midway through, and people were like seething. These teachers were just like, you know, they're writing their notes, and we took a break, and everyone was just like, why don't I know this history? Why, you know, why has it taken me so long to know this? And it was really great to see that they were so passionate now to go back in their classrooms and teach. So the Heard Museum has a really great curriculum, age appropriate, you know, great curriculum for teaching the history of the boarding school. And I think it could be applied nationwide. And then the National Museum of American Indians also has curriculum available. The Penn Museum has some curriculum as well. So for educators, there are resources out there. You just have to go find it, you know, just look around and then dedicate more days to teaching history.
Right.
Not just
Squanto?
Yeah, not poor Squanto.
Squanto Industries.
We're not disparaging Squanto.
It's everything. Yeah, well, and I think too, sort of again, kind of trying to move beyond these ideas of sort of like, here's a day or here's a month, right? Where it's like, and moving outside too, I feel like, you know, even with the Phoenix Indian School Visitor Center, right? Where like so many of the photographs were taken in the context of being presented to white people who were coming to visit in some ways, right? And so like, no, please go ahead, Rosalie, or Patty, sorry, you were saying something, or were you shaking your head?
remember when we were looking at some photos of the Herd Museum, we were looking to their archives, and we saw this scene, and it was a whole series of photos. And what we could finally figure out was they actually, the older classmates were teaching the younger classmates how to keep their dorm rooms clean and how to make the bed and cut the corners, because again, this was built on a military model. And we both had to make our beds so tight, and those corners had to be just so, and you had to pass inspection. And if you didn't make your bed right, you would get demerits, and then you'd have to work that off. But the idea that, oh, we have to teach you how to be clean, like, give me a break. But that's how they wanted your brush to be here on the dresser, and your comb here, and your mirror here. Everything was just laid out. And if we have anybody in the military watching this today, first of all, thank you for your service. Second of all, you know what we're talking about, because we had detail. That was a part of our school day, and that was a chore. And I think we both had buffing the floors.
Oh, definitely.
Yeah.
Yeah, and when you're like 90 pounds, like I was, maybe 80, when I first came here, oh my goodness, you really have to be strong to hold that buffer, or you get flung all over. But there isn't anyone from like a matron standpoint that says, oh, let me stand behind you and help you. It's like, no, this is your detail, so go do it. And it didn't matter that, okay, well, I'm not tall enough to reach the handles, or I'm not strong enough to hold it. It was just a matter of, you go do it, because that's what your job is today. And so, that whole idea of empathy, sympathy,
that a parent would typically provide. But at the dorms, you didn't have that.
No.
You had all of the other dorm people, the girls who lived in the dorm with you, standing around watching you and laughing.
Right. Exactly. So, you just get that whole idea of how it was here, and how, your parents or guardians, aunts, uncles, that whole family idea just wasn't here. So again, your peers became your family, and when your peers, you don't have any higher knowledge to share with anyone, so you don't have those experiences. Everyone's like, hey, let's go do this. All right, and so you miss that guidance that you would normally have. And so I think one thing that we talk about is when early on in the 1800s, when everyone's marching around and wearing uniforms, military uniforms, and you're a little child and you're marching and you fall down, normally you have a parent that will pick you up and dust you off. Are you all right? But here, with this military idea, you fall down, skin your knee, and you're told, get up. Soldiers don't cry. So you lose some of that empathy and some of that sympathy that would be normal in a normal setting, a family setting. You miss that.
That nurturing element. Yes, I absolutely.
Yeah.
And yet again, I think for me, the message is always that we're so resilient that we were able to adapt and overcome and continue on. And some people just really excelled. The music that you played in the very beginning by Russell Moore, he's a great example. He came to school here when he was about 10, and he started playing, I think, the trumpet or something here, the trumpet. And then he actually transferred to Sherman Indian High School. Boo, Sherman. We have to say that. Sorry, Sherman people. But he graduated from Sherman, and then continued his music there, and then became this world-class jazz musician that people just don't know. He played with Louis Armstrong. He's on. You can even look him up on YouTube. So, but he started here, and then we look at the band from the Phoenix Indian School. They were the best band in the territory back then before Arizona became a state. And so when Arizona finally got statehood, the band from Phoenix Indian was the band that was called upon to play at their big gala event that night. And they did. They were a large group from a high school. They had military uniforms. They were precise. They were very good. So that started this legacy of the band from Phoenix Indian, which she played in.
Yeah. I played in the band, and when I was here, and little did I know, until my sister told me, that we were actually part of the recruitment, even in the late 70s, we were part of the recruitment tools that the school used to bring other students in. So at the end of the school year, we went on a tour where we visited reservations in Arizona. And, you know, when you got off that bus, it was almost like being a mini rock star. You know, you would hear the bands here, the bands here, the bands here. And I was really young, so I didn't really understand any of that. But, you know, we'd go and play our concert and then we'd leave. And little did I know until she told me, is that there would be a person from PI saying, do you like what you heard? Your child could be part of this if you send them to PI. So we're actually still part of that recruitment program. So they were still recruiting, even, you know, even in the late 70s into the 80s, still recruiting. You still get a demerit, you still get details, inspections, you know, and no one taught you how to make a bed unless your roommate was like, let me help you out here, you know, because I never made my bed.
Trial by error.
Exactly. You know, I never made my bed when I was living at home. And then, you know, to make a bed so tight that you could bounce a quarter off of it. Who knows how to do that? Just, you know, that's not.
Why is that important?
Yeah. What about the education, right? Like, yeah. Well, and I think this kind of, you know, touches on a couple of questions that have been coming in too, which is sort of, you know, on the one hand, there's sort of this excellence that's occurring within the Phoenix Indian School, right? And with the band and like the arts and culture and like the I mean, you know, people just going to school, and then on the other hand, there's the demerits and all of this. And I was wondering if maybe if you both are comfortable about it, kind of talking about your personal experiences, right? Especially coming into Phoenix Indian School, you know, in the 70s, right? Or in the 80s when, you know, things are kind of opening up a little bit, and thinking too about like were there other options that were available to you in terms of schools or education? You know, what was it like here at the time, and sort of what is kind of the status of other schools today? There was a question too about, I just want to make sure I get it right, the perception of active reservation boarding schools today versus that of the past, right? That was a lot, so.
Well, when we came to school here, we had no choice. There was no junior high at Hopi and no high school at Hopi. And the closest towns to Hopi that had a boarding house were not for Hopis. They were all reserved for Navajo students. So like Winslow and Holbrook, those were, and even Snowflake, those were dorms that the Navajo tribe had. And you had to be Navajo to live in those dorms and go to school there. So we could have been closer to home, but we, you know, if we were not, you know, Hopi. So so we came to Phoenix Indian, and our mother chose PI because it was closest to her. I wish, well, I shouldn't say that. Sherman has the ocean. I kind of like the ocean, but I can't say I want to go to Sherman.
Ooh, Sherman, right.
But Sherman was another school in the Intermountain in Utah and Stewart in Nevada. But she, because we had a lot of other family members who went to PI, you know, and it was relatively a direct shot from the res, she chose Phoenix Indian. This was where we were going to come to school. So our grandmother came to school here, our uncles came to school here, our aunties came to school here. You know, we're a legacy family of Phoenix Indian. So this was natural for us to come to school here when we had to go away to boarding school. And what was the other part of the question? I forgot. I don't remember you.
I guess just kind of like, I guess like the tension, or sort of like, how was the educational experience when you were there at the time?
Oh my gosh. Well, so one thing, you know, and it's tough. Okay, so I already told you outside, these were not schools that were meant to create doctors and lawyers and
Right.
business people, you know, and astronauts, you know, and world-class musicians. It was not that school. It was a school designed to get you to a certain level, and then, you know, trades and for the women working in other people's homes as domestic help. So, you know, our mother knew this because she also went to a Catholic boarding school. And I think the education there was a little bit more strict and maybe perhaps better. But here, you know, it was well known that there were so many teachers here who just didn't care. And so easy classes, or, you know, don't worry about that. So our mom, she actually wrote us letters and said, you know, she said, open this up when you get settled in your room. And her letter basically told us, do what you can to get ahead and don't get behind. Just read as much as you can, work ahead in your books. You're going to find that you're not challenged. And with that, what does she know? Well, the first thing that happened, I'll tell her story because I know she won't tell it as well as I will. She's my younger sister, and she tested out of everything, every test that PI could give her. And she was in junior high. Not me, I didn't test out of everything. But as a result, they didn't know what to do with her because they gave her the advanced algebra classes, everything that they had, reading, the science classes, and they truly didn't know what to do with her. And she was in junior high. So the one actual, I think, result out of that was they sent her to the school next door, Central High School, and that's where she took her algebra class. And then she took the other classes here. So how good was the education?
It was really lacking. What Patty, I don't know if she forgot or what, but her social studies book is what, a sophomore?
Oh, I was a junior in high school.
A junior.
So my social studies book
was the social studies book I had as a seventh grader. So that tells you what the difference is there. As a junior high student, when I came here, we had one classroom and we were supposed to stay there. There weren't very many of us that were that young, coming to school here at that time, in that era. But, my teacher had a box of, they're called standard reading achievement books. And it was just a box, maybe a foot by a foot or so. And they're real thin books in there, and they go from like first grade to 12th grade. And that was our reading assignments for the whole year. And so I'm in 8th grade, so I took out the 8th grade book, and she's like, oh, no, you should start at maybe 3rd grade and see how you do. I'm like, all right. So I went through those books, and then that's when I got kicked out of 8th grade. And then that's when I started getting kicked out of classes. But what I don't understand is why they didn't just send me to Central for all my classes as opposed to just one. There was the whole idea of, you're in senior honor classes, a National Honor Society is available, but not for junior high students. So, if we get you to Central, then you're no longer in all the honor classes. Too bad, so sad. You get to have algebra at Central. And you talk about a difference in life from there to here. Those girls were wearing makeup, and they had the newest clothes and purses.
Because at the time, Central High was a very affluent public school. So, and it's still located right to the north of Phoenix, India. But so yes, I think that overall, education was
secondary.
It was second rate for sure. Yeah, but not to say that there weren't some good teachers, because we both had some really great teachers who cared, but they were the minority. And today I can say Paul Reuter was a fantastic teacher, and he taught health science classes. He was also a co-chair. Marty Conrad was a really wonderful teacher. I think he's still teaching up on the Navajo Res now. And then key people like my school counselor, Georgiana Davenport, she was fantastic. Leroy Shing, at the time Shingoipiwa now, and former chairman of Hopi Tribe, also taught here, and he cared very much about the students. And so, there were some good teachers, but overall it was like, I had some teachers who we could tell they just didn't care.
Yeah. And I think what for me, I always sort of keep thinking of and coming back to, the more that I hear about the history of PI is just sort of that, the good that came out of there was all individuals, right? The system itself was just not designed to help people, right? And even in sort of, I feel like, your case, Rosalie, where there is even options there, it's a military school, right? So it's rigid. It's this is where it is. We can't, make some exceptions or do things. It's demerits all of these things. And so I think, again, just sort of reflecting on the strength, the resiliency, the integrity, right? That sort of those values that I think are institutionalized in the Phoenix Indian School Visitor Center, and the message that is coming across, right? Where this is kind of leading into another question, right? When we think of, say, Indian School Road, right? Or certain I know there's been sort of conversation in the community or in the public about sort of, trying to change that, road name to something that maybe is less painful, or something that's sort of more.
Boo! No.
Yeah.
What do you think? No,
No, because it is the history, and it is there, and it doesn't signify anything bad. It's not a bad name like the peak that was, whose name was changed. It is the history, and it's there for everyone to see. And maybe you ask, why is that called Indian School Road? And then when you look into it, it's like, oh, because there was an Indian school that was there. When this school was built in 1891, the city of Phoenix was still about 3 miles south. And so everyone always talked about the Indian school, and then that's where that name came from, is, the Indian school is here, so that must be Indian School Road. And Indian School Road goes for quite a ways,
40 miles or so.
It's a long road, but it is the history. And like it or not, it's there. And it's one of those things where, it helps you remember.
Mm-hmm.
And it doesn't, well, in my opinion, it doesn't deter from Native people and the image or anything that is there. Unlike, like I say, the name of the peak that was changed. We never called ourselves by that name, and never talked to our friends, with that word. So, Indian School Road is very different than derogatory names.
And I would like to hear from other PI alumni. I would bet that, if you came to school here, you're going to be in favor of keeping the name, because if you erase it, then you're erasing us. And we don't want that to happen, especially when we just finished talking about how do we educate ourselves? How do we educate each other? How do we learn this history? Well, you're not going to learn about it by just changing that.
Right.
So it's a different argument than, say, names that are racist, names that are sexist. This is Indian School Road.
That's what it was, right? Yeah, it is a descriptor. It is literally, that is the road, right? Yeah, I mean, I guess maybe looking at the chat too, there are a couple questions that I do want to make sure that we get to as they ask, but I'd be curious to kind of hear. So, I mean, we've talked a little bit about kind of individual education efforts that people can do, right? Maybe those are non-native folks who are sort of have a different relationship to the land or a different relationship to the communities here, right? But again, even considering what a interesting convergence of places modern Phoenix is, right? These can be questions that could be answered, or things that people could do from a number of different communities. We talked about like the Herd Museum and the tours that are being offered, but I guess I'd be really curious to kind of hear from both of you, like, are there any other like sort of larger educational or institutions, artists, organizers doing good work out there that people might be able to follow up with, or like kind of raising awareness? Or like, where is sort of like Native arts and culture in sort of a really broad sense within Phoenix Metro? I mean, especially given kind of, again, Phoenix Indian School Visitor Center, but also Indian Country Today, and thinking about Australia, Canada, other places like that too.
You're talking about Phoenix specific, or?
Yeah, I would think so, like Phoenix or Arizona. Yeah.
Well, the Herd Museum has been the leader in this history, because in 2000, when they debuted the Indian School boarding school exhibit, her daughter actually worked at the Herd Museum and was one of the student guides, and then helped voice some of the narration in that exhibit. And then I was part of the advisory group that renovated that exhibit and updated it. And now the new exhibit is open there. And actually you can go online and take the tour. So you'll see the images, and I actually narrate that. So you can go to the Herd Museum and look at their virtual tours and take the tour of the boarding school exhibit. And so they truly have been the leader in this effort to educate. And then now with the Phoenix Indian School Visitor Center, taken up some of the slack. This is another great place to come for information. And but honestly, even tribes aren't really getting into this history so much. So you've got limited sources. On a national and international scale, there's the Native American Boarding School Healing Coalition, and they're based up in Minneapolis. And so they look at boarding schools across the US, but also in DC. And they hold annual conventions. So as an alumni of any boarding school, you can join that. And as a person interested, you can also join the organization to learn about what they're doing and the work that they're doing to get that recognition and that acknowledgement of the horrible past of boarding schools. We're still living with these legacies because it was not just a legacy of kids being torn away from their parents and brought to boarding school. After a couple of generations, it becomes normalized. And all of a sudden it's like, well, when you have kids, you just send them to boarding school. That's just how it is. And today we still have that, because we laugh about on the res, pretty much any res, you have day schools. Mm. And so the difference was so stark for parents and the community that no longer the kids have to go to boarding school. Now the younger kids could stay home on the res and they could go to day school because they didn't have to stay there overnight. They came home. So it was day school. You know what they call them in the cities? School. It's not day school. So this normalizing of this crazy behavior, it drives me nuts. And so, you know, when you're looking at information, you've got some places to go and get information, but it's sometimes very hard to find that if you don't know where to look for information.
Mm-hmm. I was wondering maybe if you could talk on a little bit about the later history of the school and kind of especially the closure. You know, I know that you mentioned sort of declining enrollments and, you know, it seems to like, I would imagine maybe there were day schools, right? Schools that were opening on the reservation, or maybe there was migration from reservations to cities. And so, you know, people were going to other schools, but could you kind of talk about that final era of PI and kind of, and then maybe even into the movement into the Phoenix Indian School Visitor Center and how that was established?
So early on, well, in the 70s, 80s, when tribal gaming came onto the scene, then there was money for the tribes to actually build their own schools and not wait for federal government funds to come through. So the different tribes start building their schools, you know, their junior highs and their high schools. And then that's how the population here at Phoenix Indian dwindled to where in 1990, there were less than 100 students here that last year. So I think it was the Talahongva and then the Hopi Tribe that were one of the last tribes to have high schools. And then that's when that population of the boarding school really dropped. But I'm sorry, I lost my thought. So the population was dwindling, and it was too expensive really to keep the school open, because even in 1990, the school still went from Central Avenue to almost 7th Street, and then from Indian School Road to the Grand Canal. So that's a huge piece of property to tend to for less than 100 students. And then, you know, you still had math, English, reading, writing, you know, whatever else it was, shop and everything. So you had all those teachers, and you could almost have more teachers than you had students. Mm-hmm. So, you know, again, that financial aspect really was what closed the school.
And the other thing was the Bureau announced the closure of Phoenix Indian about 2 years before it actually closed. So it was preparing people, we're going to close this school. And so it's so interesting because this school that was established in 1891, and there was such resistance from the Native families to being forced to have their kids, you know, being sent away to boarding school, such a resistance and such tragic circumstances for the first, you know, 2 decades or so. And then, you know, again, it becomes normalized, and then it just becomes habit. And then we mentioned earlier how the students changed the school and changed the attitudes and made it what they wanted to make it anyway, and continue to practice their culture and speak their languages. So at the end, the students were really, really upset that the school was closing. And they sent letters, they asked, please, please keep it open. You know, for the ones who were juniors, they said, please keep it open one more year so we can graduate from here because we've been going to school here all of our lives, you know. And then other families started realizing, well, I don't want to send my student there who's in junior high or high school because it's closing. So that all added to the decline of the population. So it was so interesting. And I worked at a local TV station at the time, and we covered the final graduating class of Phoenix Indian. And it was packed. It was packed with just not the students graduating, but everybody else who wanted to be there for the last graduating class. And it was just so sad when, you know, the ceremony ended and people came outside. And I looked, and there was, sure enough, a couple of buses out there waiting to pack up the rest of the kids and drive them back to the res. And everyone else's cars, you know, family cars were here. So a huge change in I think, the attitude and the reaction to the boarding school. And, you know, we're on a Facebook page, the Phoenix Indian School chat group. Hey guys, if you're out there watching, hopefully you're going to make some comments here. But, you know, everybody on there today, you go on and read those comments and people love it. You know, they talk about the good times that they had here and whether they played sports or had some other activity. They talk about their outing experience. They talk about things they would do off campus. And people are proud, you know, we have that PI pride in us. This is our school, this is our home. And so we carry that with us.
Speaking of the chat group, I was reading a comment the other day, and this guy was commenting, I love buffing the floors. And I was laughing. It was so funny because, you know, to go from the military idea of thou shalt buff the floor and it shall be like this to where, you know, at towards the end, it's like, hey, this is fun. You know, let me go ahead and do this. It just, what an opposite idea there, you know. And again, it's just that idea of those students changing and then, you know, not having that total militaristic idea. I mean, the military was still there. The military idea was
But
still
isn't
there.
that great? Indians taking something that was supposed to be like a punishment and like, hey, I'm having fun.
Exactly. And that's, you know, that's all through. You see that, you know, hey, this is kind of fun. Hey, let's do this. You know,
They think they're punishing us, but here we are.
exactly. And you see that all through the eras, you know. It just, hey, let's make lemonade out of lemons, you know, so to speak. And you see that all over, you know. You see that in even the students who first started in the band. You know, look at that and think about it. You know, here are children that were coming off the reservations that didn't speak English, and, you know, we're drinking the milk, having, you know, gurgly stomachs, wondering who died. All these things were happening. And then someone puts this instrument in front of you. You don't know it's an instrument. You don't know what it is.
I forgot about that. And then the sheet music is not even written in English. It's Italian. And then
So
notes are a different language too. And to think that these little boys, and they were young, were able to master those instruments and become the premier band in the territory.
Exactly.
It's resilience. It's
That's
intent.
PI, right?
It's
Exactly.
PI spirit.
That's it. That's PI. So, you know, you just look around and you see all these things, and even like the football team, you know, who they beat? ASU, not ASU.
Oh, yes.
Teachers.
Yes. When the football team back in those days, and we're talking end of the 1800s, you know, 1900 era, but there were 3 schools that were here. It was Arizona Teachers College, which became ASU, Phoenix Indian, and then Phoenix Union. And so those 2 high schools played the college football team, and PI beat ASU.
Good.
Question. I know we're coming out of time, so what do we
Oh
have?
yeah, no. Well, I think like this is kind of a you know, thinking about the closure and then sort of like what comes next, right? There are a few questions, again, kind of personal, right? But also maybe just kind of generally. So like, what came next for students after they graduated PI? You know, there's personal questions about, did you move away and continue on to a university or college? Did you remain with your family on the reservation? You know, what was sort of next, where did people go? We talked a little bit about Russell Moore, you know, and some of his accomplishments, but.
Well, it depended on the era. What happened, I think, to graduates, we can look over here and there's a display, you know, we can't see it, but Ira Hayes. Ira Hayes came to school here and he was a model student. Every account of Ira Hayes is that he had good grades. He was a Christian. He didn't smoke or drink. You know, he wrote letters home to his mother and was just a really good person. And he came from Sakatone, Arizona, and joined the Marines and served in World War II. And I guarantee you, you know Ira Hayes. And you might sit there and say, no, I don't know who that is. You do, because you've seen his photo. He was one of the people who raised the flag at Mount Suribachi on Iwo Jima. And so he never wanted to be a hero or considered a hero, whatever, but, you know, he's just one of many students from PI who went on to serve in the military. So that was a big option. I'm friends with several people who came to school here at PI and they went back to their reservations. They got, you know, some education or some kind of training and they were able to go back to the reservations and work. And others, you know, it just depended. And I think the big thing that the government didn't count on is that so many people met here and got married and they were from different tribes. And so having met in Phoenix, maybe this is the more comfortable place to stay. And so they raised their kids in the urban area here. So it really depends on who did what. Clinton Patia, wonderful man, came to school here at PI. And he says, you know, back, I think, I don't remember what year he came to school here, like
A long time.
60s or 50s, I think the 50s. And he did talk about, he had good teachers and he did go to college and he became the president of the Fort McDowell Yavapai Nation and was just a wonderful, strong supporter. When we were starting to renovate the building, and that was an effort by Native American Connections and the Phoenix Indian Center. And when I was the project manager for that, we went to different tribal councils and we told them what we wanted to do. We wanted to be as transparent as possible so that if anybody had any kind of negative feelings about renovating the space, that they would know what we were going to do and they could tell us and guide us. And we did not meet any opposition. Everyone said, good, do something with this building and create that space for our people, because this was a natural gathering place. It was open for 99 years. Every time our family came to Phoenix, we always came here to the Phoenix Indian School because we had relatives going to school here. So we'd go visit them in the dorms, maybe go to a game or take them out to dinner or whatever. And our family was like, you know, hundreds of other families coming here to visit. So this was a natural gathering place. And the people who graduated from here, even though they were not expected to go to college, they were certainly not, you know, promoted and trained to go to college, you know, prepared to go to college. Tell them about Nora Cherry.
Oh yeah, Nora Cherry. She actually works at ASU, and her mother came to school here. Now her mother came at a time and
like 16 to 20. I think she graduated in the early 20s.
In the early 20s. So that was time when the children were being forced to come to the boarding school. But she was one who said, I want to go because I want to be a teacher. I want to learn, and I want to graduate, and I want to go to college. And so she came voluntarily to the school and graduated with honors from PI. And after graduation, she couldn't pass the entry exam into the teacher's college, even though she graduated with honors. And so
from Phoenix Indian.
From Phoenix Indian. And so again, we're talking about that education. So with honors, she still couldn't pass the entry exam into college. So what she did was she used those domestic skills that she had learned here and was hired on by a professor. And she took care of that house, you know, all the domestic things that had to happen there. And in lieu, he tutored her in the evenings. And so after a period of time, she was actually able to pass the entry exam, and she did get her degree, and she did become a teacher. So, you know,
and the full circle part is that her daughter, Nora, now works at ASU And she is the recruiter for the College of Theater and Dance. And Nora is a Broadway star. Retired.
Awesome. Yeah,
Yes,
I mean,
the story, I think it's important to say too that every person's journey at Phoenix Indian is individual. You know, we cannot speak for everybody, and we're not going to. We had classmates who came to school here and they didn't get involved with anything because all they want to do is just get through this process and go back home because they didn't want to be a part of this. And you can't blame them. So everyone's journey is unique. How did you navigate coming to school here? How did you survive? And some kids were here for like 8 years. So everyone's journey is very much their own journey.
And certainly that journey changes from decade to decade.
mm-hmm.
And so you do have that trauma, and then you have the trauma of generations, because, you know, when you're told as a little child, get up, don't cry, soldiers don't cry, and you lead that, you know, you take that to your children, and then your grandchildren are recipients of that, and your great-grandchildren are recipients of that. And it just snowballs. It just gets bigger and bigger. And
That
but there's
the whole study of epigenetics,
Epigenetics, yeah.
epigenetics, that trauma lives on in your DNA. So, you know, you may not have attended boarding school, but if you had a great-great-grandparent who did, and, you know, down the line, that trauma is there in your blood. So
regardless of whether you know it or not, it's still there. And sometimes you don't know where that comes from. And, you know, to talk about every story being great, you know, that's not a true reflection of the school. And, you know, and you look at yourselves, you know, as individuals, and what's in your makeup, you know, we're sisters, but our personalities are very different. So whereas, you know, someone could come to Patty and say, hey, you know, let's go do this. And she says, no. And, you know, the same person come to me, let's do this. Okay. You know, and you go down that road, and you might not come back from it. You might not come back. And that's just, you know, sometimes that's it within yourself. You know, how can you stand up for yourself? And I think that one thing that really sticks out to me is that when we were here, there was the outing program where any stranger, Joe Blow, could come check you out and go do, you know, you would do work for them, supposedly paid. But you had to negotiate your own pay. So again, when we talk about our personalities, you know, Patty, if she were to be hired out, you know, she would say the minimum wage is this, and I deserve that. And meanwhile, me, I'd be saying like, oh, a quarter, thank you, good sir, you know, but that's just the way it is. And, you know, it's just amazing to be a student here and go on the guiding program and then have to say, hey, I deserve to be paid X amount of dollars for the work I've done. Who does that? And how does that happen? And, you know, we're your parents, and we're somebody looking out for you. And again, that's where it just really is, you know, the students around you, we're your family. And, you know, everyone stood up for each other, you know, again, it's a family. So you don't always get along, you have fights, you do this, you do that. But overall, if Stuart came over here and tried to do something, you know, we're PI, and, you know, we'll stand up for each other in those situations.
Yeah, and I think it speaks to, you know, a question earlier too. And I think, you know, there's, especially, you know, this year, everyone's been in a pandemic, you know, there's been a lot of protests and a lot of, you know, institutional movements towards racial justice, or towards, you know, reckoning, if we're even going to sort of use a strong word. And so I think there's a lot of people who are really interested now in trying to become more educated, or trying to create change in the world, right? And I think that, you know, what your conversation feels really important to note for me is that, like, you know, if you are in a community that is not directly impacted by this, like, if you are trying to create change and you are not working with that community, you are only replicating the history that has been taking place, right? And if you are assuming that you understand or know someone's story without actually allowing them to tell you that story, you are also replicating that history, right? I think this is, you know, for us as a center, again, why the work that PISVC is doing, the work that Labriola is doing, is so crucial to trying to open up more space here in Phoenix as, you know, the southwest quarter of, you know, Indian School Park gets sold to Colliers, or like as, you know, the land continues to get winnowed down, right? I mean, and this has been the history of the reservations from the beginning, right? It's just like, we're going to take it, and it's stolen, right? Everything is stolen land. And so then the question becomes, how can these stories try to create space to begin to open up conversations for that, right? I think there's a question, I think we might have time for one or two more. And so there was a question about how Indian school history was represented in the 2012 centennial. And was it? And if it wasn't, maybe also speaking to, I know there's the annual event at the visitor center every year. So maybe speaking to some of the larger celebrations of Native culture that for the Indian school or for other organizations or communities here.
Like, if people want to partner with the Phoenix Indian School Visitor Center, please contact Rosalie. We're here.
Yeah.
So you have my contact information, don't you, Jake?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Okay.
And it's on a sign outside too. But no, so when Arizona celebrated statehood, there was minimum amount of acknowledgement, and it's sad. I mean, Phoenix Indian has played such an important part in Arizona statehood. Again, it just, and boarding schools in general have played a major role in the development of this country. So there's a lot of room for growth, and we'll just leave it at that and be nice.
That's a good idea.
Probably good for us to be nice here, right? Probably, maybe we can be less nice in conversations that aren't recorded, right? So there's a few questions too. I'm just sort of trying to kind of make sure that we address some of them in here in kind of our last minutes together. You know, we talked a lot about the military history of the Indian schools, and I think really sort of thinking about the ways that, you know, this country has, and I think we see this happening at the border as well, right? It's just sort of separating children from families, right? As a strategy that's been used to try to retain land, right? To retain land ownership. But I don't know if we've talked about this as much. Was there a religious component or a religious affiliation with the school, or was that sort of something that was more running parallel, something that was happening more on, you know, Catholic schools, reservations, or?
Well, early on, you were supposed to choose a religion because, you know, our religions were considered pagan. So choose a religion. We don't care what it is, as long as you're, you know,
the religion was Christianity.
Yeah, right.
But you had a choice if, I guess, I don't even know if choice is the right word, but Baptist or
Protestant, Lutheran, you know, whatever it is, yeah, Catholic. So you had to choose and be part of that. You know, it's kind of funny because I see that within our family, even where, okay, I'm this. Do you go to church? No, you know, but I was dipped in that water, so that's what I am. And you know, I checked off that box kind of thing, you know. So early on, that's how it was. And you know, when we came to school here, it was kind of I thought it was funny because they had a priest come in and would conduct service in our rec hall, but that service was done totally differently than what a typical service would be. You know, I mean, I'm talking about a Catholic service. And so, you know, in Catholicism, you go to confession and then you can receive communion and you do this and you do that. And, you know, he was just like, okay, well, we'll get to confession later on, but, you know, still take the sacrament and stuff like that. So it's kind of like a
hybrid,
loose. And I don't know of any other religions, but you know, and we didn't talk about religion when we were here. We didn't talk about, oh, are you Baptist? You know, I can't hang out with you. You know, it was your tribe. You know, what tribe are you? Yeah. You know, who do you associate with? and that kind of thing. So that Christianity portion, by the time we came to school here, was really just on the sideline, so to speak. Whereas early on,
well, they
you
still
had to be.
Yes, and so again, you have to that question has to be asked, like, what decade are you talking about?
Right.
Because at the beginning, everyone was Christian, and it was just like, I guess, non-denominational. I don't know, maybe, I don't know, but everyone had to pray. Everybody had to go to church, and that was right along with the military marching. So things changed over time, and by the time we came to school here, they offered, you can go, if you're Catholic, you can go to this service. If you're Baptist, you can go to this one. But nobody offered, and we can, as Hopis, we couldn't, I mean, we can still pray down here, but our service or our ceremonies could not be conducted here per se. So they didn't have an option if you wanted to continue to practice your traditional religion. And I want to use this time to point out that America says, we have freedom of religion, and that's so not true. But Native Americans are the true practitioners of freedom of religion, because we don't go around and try to convert you to our way. You guys, you have to be Hopi or you can go to hell or whatever. No, and other tribes don't do that either, because we respect everyone's way of worshiping. And that's why I say we're the true practitioners of freedom of religion. We expect you have your own way, and that's good for you. We have our own way, and that's good for us. So
really our religions are birthrights. And so, to try to convert is not within those systems, those Native American systems. So, it's a birthright, and I respect your birthright as long as, and you respect mine. And we'll get along fine, because ultimately, we all believe in a higher being, regardless of what we call them. So that's a good point.
Yeah, no, that's great. There are a few more questions, but I feel like we're coming up at the end of our time here. So I think, before maybe I close, is there anything either of you would kind of like to end on? Anything that maybe we didn't touch on, or that you'd like to kind of draw out from the conversation today?
Sure.
So we have a big ask for all the audience, across the world, I think. And we ask this all the time, because someday someone will be there that can answer this ask. And I'll start and let Patty finish, but we are looking for someone who has contact with Willie Nelson. So Willie Nelson, back in the 80s, would come here when he had concerts in town. He would come and he would play private concerts for the students here at PI. And so there are different pictures of people dressed in their traditional regalia, with him. And in the 1990 yearbook, the final yearbook, there are pictures of him and Crystal Gale. Will Sampson came here. Will Sampson's gone now. But we've always thought that if we could reach out to Willie Nelson, we think that he would be more than happy to come back and play a concert here. We would really like to relive that part and, gain that recognition for the Phoenix Indian School Visitor Center.
Willie's a good friend was Dennis Alley, and Dennis had a Wisdom Indian dance group. And so they actually went on tour with Willie Nelson. And so whenever, like she said, Willie was in town, he would come here and he'd drive his big old bus on campus, and he and his sister and a couple of other bandmates would get out and they would set up in the dorm or another part of campus, and they'd play free concerts. And so I actually did a story on that one year, and the students just loved it. And whatever staff, teachers were here. I came to a concert during the Christmas break, and there were some students who couldn't go home for different reasons. And so he came out and he played a free concert for us, and it was great. So we'll just end on that.
We tag Willie. Yeah, we got to get Willie out here.
Great.
Willie's a good guy, right? I think let's see if we can make this happen. Let's see if we've got any really adept Twitter users out there, right? Let's see if we can work with Tammy, get a big concert on the park with Willie Nelson. Once everybody gets right, that would be awesome. Cool. Well, I mean, this is the end of our time. So I think I just want to drop a few quick things in the chat in terms of ways that people can kind of continue to follow up. We do have a survey, so we'd love to hear what you thought about the presentation, other things you might be interested in, anything we could do to improve. So please feel free to take that survey at the link in the chat. It will also be sent out to you via email, so no worries. The Phoenix Indian School Visitor Center also offers tours by appointment. So you can really get a deeper sense of the history of PI. You can see a lot of the yearbooks. There's so much more than what we were able to kind of cover here today, right? So Rosalie, Patty, thank you so much for taking the time today to just share about this. I think so many people are unfamiliar with it, and we're really grateful to try and help raise a little bit of awareness about a really important part of Phoenix's history. And to try to be working in the future to do more for that too. So thank you so much. We're so grateful.
Well, it's Escalate. Thank you so much for having us and allowing us to share this history. Thank you everyone for joining us online. And yes, please come rent some space here at the Phoenix Indian School Visitor Center as well. Escalate.
Escalate, thank you.
Thank you, everybody. Have a wonderful afternoon. Thank you so much.